Hello, friends. Welcome to Science Talk. I am your host, Jim Massa. Well, this is an article I saw that appeared on the online publication EOS, which is a subsidiary of the American Geophysical Union, AGU, and I found this to be quite fascinating. Melting Arctic sea ice strengthens tides. I'm going to say, well, sounds kind of intuitive, which is true because when you have the ice acts as a dampener. Remove the ice, and now the tide, there's nothing holding it back, nothing inhibiting it, so the ice can get stronger. That's basically the overall general idea. So, if climate change throws off the seasonal freeze-thaw cycle of sea ice, it could trigger a reinforcing cycle of sea ice melt in parts of the Canadian Arctic. And there you got a bunch of researchers there walking around on the ice. That looks like fun. In the Canadian Arctic archipelago, CAA, the strength of tides in the Kitikmeot Sea is more connected to sea ice cover than what has previously been thought and what has been observed in neighboring regions. This new understanding of the sea ice tide connection, which came basically from years worth of monitoring things, that suggests that as climate change lengthens the ice free season, right? And I discussed that with you, that the ice free season is increasing in the Arctic. The strong tide season will also increase. And that could then trigger a feedback loop of sea ice melt. This was like a wow moment for me because, like, okay, we understand, the influx of warmer waters and decreased albedo, increased solar radiation, all working to reduce the ice, etc., and we're losing the ice. This as a yet another mechanism to reduce the ice, and that creates basically a positive feedback loop. That to me is very fascinating. In the Kitikmeot, the tidal height and currents are reduced by around 50% due to the seasonal sea ice, explained Lena Rotermund, who is an oceanographer at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And she's the PI on the project. Ice-free periods are becoming longer, so we will see longer periods of the stronger tides, shorter periods of the reduced tides, i.e. when there actually is ice. So as we see here in the subheadline, melted ice leads to stronger tides. In the Arctic winter, the seas freeze over with ice. Yeah. Arctic summer, they melt, they thaw, right? But that cycle is just one component of what happens seasonally in the cryosphere. Cryosphere has anything to do with something frozen, ice, permafrost, that kind of stuff. Every winter, the tides are reduced by the sea ice, Rotermund said. In the Arctic and elsewhere, tides can bring both nutrients and heat from the seafloor to the surface and therefore play an important role in ocean dynamics and ecosystems. And they also regulate the production of sea ice. If you have churning action, right? You have vertical movement, whatever. You have all this physical action taking place. That's going to impede ice formation. And the friction that is afforded by such action imparts a bit of heat, also will work to impede ice formation. And if you're bringing heat up from the seafloor, thanks to the influx of warmer oceanic water in there, well, guess what? And not to mention the heat itself just simply diffusing through basic radiative processes here, you're going to further inhibit ice formation. So, and they have a little map here of the sea ice in the Kitikmeot region. Right? It's right up here. basically in the Nunavut territory. So the sea ice is more effective. I gotta highlight this for you. There's no way. Maybe I can enlarge this. Let's see. Okay, there's the enlargement, but I can't read the caption. Okay, We'll go back to this. Okay, so I want to see if I can. I'll just highlight it and read it to you. So that sea ice is more affected by Atlantic tides than sea ice in other regions of the CAA, Canadian Arctic Archipelago. The Victoria Strait through which the Atlantic tides enter this region is the inlet of water between the Ukalaktutiak. So Kwalaktutiak and Talajuak Bays, which are north of Uksuktuk. So here is Iqaluktutiak, Uksuktiak, right? So basically, it's in this region is what they're where they're looking at. So that's the area of study. But the important thing is this affected by Atlantic tide. Yet another example of the continued Atlantification of the Arctic. And by the way, this region here, all this region here, right? This entire region here, all these little archipelagos and bays, this will be the last holdout for any sea ice. Depending on who you listen to, a blue ocean event is less than 1 million square kilometers of sea ice. Others say no ice anywhere. Well, if you subscribe to the latter definition, this region will be this whole entire Canadian archipelago region will be the last place to lose the ice. So this is the area of study. So to better understand what was going on here, they collect the studies in the Kitikmeot Sea, which is just west of. That's right here, right, just west of it, over here. And then from that data, they determined tidal height and currents for the year. From that data, they found that the wintertime tides were 50 to 60% shallower, 65% slower than summertime tides. They used that data to help build a high-resolution tidal model, including its many narrow and shallow straits. They then examined whether the tide dampening is widespread in winter and what it is about sea ice that dampens those tides. And recall, I mentioned that at the outset of this video, that you have ice that dampens the tidal effect. When you don't have the ice to dampening it, well then, this is where that feedback loop comes in, as I tried to say earlier. Now you work in the heat, but you have the physical action, the friction, all that stuff makes it difficult for the ice to form and stay formed. Strong tidal dissipation in the Victoria Strait region leads to smaller tides in the Kitikmeot Sea, both summer and winter. Victoria Strait is a key passage through which the Atlantic tides enter the Kitikmeot Sea. On top of that, the models show that in wintertime, sea ice friction, right, as I mentioned earlier, as well as sea ice blockages formed by thick, rough sea ice within Victoria Strait cause additional wintertime tidal dissipation. Basically, another way of dampening out the tides. The researchers verified their model using tide height measurements collected throughout the region, and they published their findings in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Oceans. So could climate change trigger the feedback loop? Right, and you see right here this little headline. Tidal mixing can bring subsurface heat to the surface, contribute to melting of ice. We pause there and let you think about that for a moment. Contribute to melting of ice. So this dual seasonal cycle of sea ice and tides could be knocked out of balance by the additional melting of sea ice. Thanks, what we're doing. But sea ice will lead to longer seasons of strong tides. However, it's not the high tide level, but the strong tidal currents that could complete the feedback loop. Strong tidal currents lead to more vertical tidal mixing, particularly in shallower waters. In Arctic winters, the ocean surface is colder than the bottom water layers, so tidal mixing can bring subsurface heat to the surface, contributing to ice melting. Thus, the reduction in sea ice leads to stronger tides, which in turn can lead to further reduction in sea ice. Right, highlighted there for you. The reduction in sea ice leads to stronger tides, which can lead to further reduction in sea ice. In the eastern Arctic Ocean, the recent strengthening of tidal current has already brought more heat than usual from the interior of the ocean to the surface, causing more sea ice to melt, setting up a reinforcing cycle. University of Alaska Fairbanks oceanographer Igor Polyakov. Igor's a good friend. A really nice guy, excellent scientist. We collaborated on quite a few things. Studies like this are very important and useful because the effects of tides on Arctic waters and the ecosystem are often understated. Now, Igor was not involved with this particular research, but he has done other extremely important research, and I've cited some of those in other videos I have done. Feedback loop between sea ice and tides could play a much larger role than expected in some regions. In the Kitikmeot region, the tides are reduced by about 50% from summer to winter, while in the Western Canadian Arctic archipelago, the reduction is about 25%. And the Eastern Canadian Arctic archipelago, it is about 5 to 10%. Now, the differences depend on the physical characteristics of the region and what the local physics is doing. So going forward, Dr. Roterman basically states that these regional differences need to be better accounted for in the models of sea ice and Arctic tides. The monitoring continues, and they plan to examine how the longer periods of strong tides affect the formation of polynyas, which is an area of open water in the sea when there should be sea ice all over the place. Polynyas are important. It's like an oasis. You have organisms show up there. For example, cetacean. Oh, there's an open water area. They can do something important like breathe. That kind of stuff. Seals can pop out of the water onto the ice to rest. Maybe they find a little cove or something like that in the ice and have their pups. Polar bears are there, etc., etc. So polynya, by the way, it's a Russian word, is basically persistent open water and otherwise sea ice everywhere. So this is very interesting. Another factor, another piece of the puzzle explaining, how and why we're losing the sea ice, and could very well be on the way to a permanent loss of all sea ice. Fascinating. Thank you for your time. Hello folks, this is Jim here with Science Talk, asking you to please subscribe to my channel and to inform others of my channel and of the work that I do. Please share to social media platforms that you use. Also, as a reminder, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I load up more videos. Finally, I ask that you support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your support.